or the leader of the particular gathering that you're leading worship for. They may have some direction, or they may have some time constraints that they want to communicate to you. Think through the songs before you do them and recognize that staying on the melody is very important for the congregation to be able to follow the song well. Have band signals. Make sure that the band understands clearly where you're going with a particular song. Finally, recognize that it's vital that we as worship leaders honor the time commitments that we have made. We can worship God as fully with one song as we can with 7 songs. So stay within those parameters and honor those who have decided the entire mandate for that particular gathering. Many times at the conclusion of gatherings, there's an opportunity for people to be prayed for, whether it's for healing or other needs in their lives. We'll call this ministry time. Ministry time is a precious opportunity for a smaller contingency from the worship team to come up and play as people are being ministered to by the Holy Spirit. It's also a great opportunity to play over people instrumentally, to simply allow the music to facilitate each individual's encounter with God. Apprentice leaders can be employed at this point as well. Worship leaders who are just learning the ropes of how to lead worship effectively. This is a great opportunity for them to try out their skills in worship leading as people are being prayed for. It's also a great opportunity to introduce new songs, songs that you would like to become part of the life of the congregation. But in a ministry time, they take a more subdued level of approach, and they can get sown into the hearts of the people who have gathered. Recognize as a worship leader that what happens in your own heart after you've led a worship set is every bit as important as what has happened during the worship set.
Often, our type of personality, the first thing you feel a little kind of like you've just made yourself vulnerable in front of your people. So what you crave is the affirmation of some people coming up to say, that was great, and that song was perfect and everything. But the more you do it, the more you realize that kind of affirmation ultimately is empty, because what happens is if you start living for that, you'll start doing things in order to get it. And so what I'm learning to do, I'm kind of thick-headed, so it takes me a while, is just simply to pause at some moment shortly after the worship time and say, Father, that was my offering to you, and just wait for a response from Him. And go by what I sense He says to me. Because even if He wants to correct me and say, Brian, you shouldn't have done that because of this reason, it comes in love and it comes in a way that, and I'm not saying not listen to the human voices, then you're, I think, ready to listen to the human voices and learn our lessons.
The Scriptures teach us that it's absolutely vital that we guard our hearts as worship leaders. After you finish leading a worship set, invite the pastor to give perspective, comments, thoughts about the particular dynamic of worship that morning. As well, remember to avoid touching the glory that belongs to God. It's easy to believe our own reviews and to take into our hearts comments of affirmation, of encouragement that others give us. Be thankful for those comments. Look people in the eye and say that you appreciate what they've said. But in your heart of hearts, remember to keep a safe distance between God's glory and your willingness to be faithful to what He's called you to do. Remember as well, on those very tough days, when all things seem to have gone wrong, that they keep us humble and give us a clear perspective on who God has made us to be and our own desperation for Him.
I've found that when you're leading worship, there'll often be times, hopefully mostly, where things go wonderfully well. But of course, there's always going to be those times where it's an absolute nightmare, where the PA is sounding horrible, something's feeding back, the drummer is having an off day, can't play in tune, and the congregation just seem like they're bored stiff, and it's one of the worst feelings in the world. And the amount of times I've felt like putting my guitar down and shouting at the congregation, telling them, come on, worship God. And I think those are the kind of things that every worship leader will experience. And usually when things are going terribly, just as you feel that it can't go any worse, you snap a guitar string and then you really feel like you've hit rock bottom. And I think the thing that I just have to keep reminding myself is that when you're a worship leader, you're called to serve the church and to serve those people. And sometimes things will go wonderfully well and people seem to be really appreciative. Other times things will go dreadfully and people won't seem to sing the songs or get into it. But it's reminding yourself that you do it for God, and when it's going wonderfully well, great. When it's going dreadfully, you still do it for God. It's the same heart, it's the same attitude.
We're never going to hit a home run every time we lead worship. The God factor in the whole thing is that sometimes He chooses to pour out His Spirit in a fantastic way, and sometimes He doesn't. And sometimes I feel like I'm in paradise, and a lot of times I don't. And usually I feel somewhere in between. Usually I'm connecting with God to some degree, and I feel God's blessing. But I don't use that as a watermark for, okay, is this a good worship set?
Every worship leader experiences, from time to time, what we perceive to be a set gone wrong. Yet it's often amazing to see that simply because that is our perspective as a worship leader, it's not necessarily held by those who engaged in worship that particular morning. How often someone will come up to a worship leader, having had one of the most precious worship encounters they've ever had with God in a set that we thought had gone wrong from the gate. Remember to learn from your experiences, good and bad. Try not to repeat the same mistakes twice, but also to glean from those things that went well and apply them the next time that you lead worship.
Every time you do it, it's different and you learn something. So that next time you go to prepare, to put together, to lead worship, you know, if you tried to push it too long because you were sure you were supposed to do that 7th song and you realize everybody just shut down. Next time, when you get to that point, you get more sensitive to read the congregation and go, are they shutting down? Is it over? It may not be over for me because I really had my pet song I wanted to do, but for them, they were over. And you learn how to be a more sensitive pastoral leader as a worship leader to sort of sense what's happening. And then you go on and you take those lessons you learned, and next time you prepare for worship, when you sit down with that blank piece of paper, you're thinking about the moment in the future, but you're also thinking about all the lessons you've learned in the past. And so it's almost like a wave. You know, each time you lead, you learn a little bit more, then you go back, and then you know, it's just, there's a sense of constantly growing and maturing, and there's a sense that you never learn all that you need to learn. And because every time is fresh, there's an excitement every time you do it. I think if we're really being obedient to God and doing it in a relational fashion, it never needs to get boring. And I think that's part of the excitement about being involved in this type of ministry. There's a freshness to it always, if we're willing to take the risk to be obedient and be relational.
Worship leadership is both an art and a science. We hope that to some degree we've been able to demystify the task of worship leadership for you. Remember that worship is all about God. This is His story. Remember also that worship leadership is all about those who have gathered to express their love and affection for Him. I want to personally bless you and encourage you as a worship leader to be faithful as you continue to lead God's people before the throne of grace.